This lecture is for students studying English with Banana. Master grammar in a month. We are here to help you understand English grammar better with the books. Today, we are going to talk about auxiliary verbs and modal verbs. Modal verbs and auxiliary verbs are verbs that help other verbs to show meaning. Auxiliary verbs indicate information, such as tense, mood, voice, and other grammatical aspects of the action. Modal verbs are a type of auxiliary verb that indicate the modality. The main difference between modal verbs and auxiliary verbs is that modal verbs are not subject to inflection, whereas auxiliary verbs change according to tense, case, voice, aspect, person, and number. Let's discuss this further. Auxiliary verbs are verbs that help the main verb to show its tense or form negation or questions. They add extra information to the main verb, such as time, tense, grammatical aspect, modality, voice, etc. There are three common helping verbs in the English language. Be, am, is, are, was, were, etc. Do, does, did, etc. Have, has, have, had, etc. To understand the importance of auxiliary words more clearly, let's look at some examples. The auxiliary word is underlined in these sentences. She didn't like him. They are not helping us. Has she completed the project? She was playing basketball. He has bought a new house. Now let's talk about modal verbs. Apart from the verbs mentioned above, there is also a separate category of auxiliary verbs known as modal verbs. This category includes can, could, may, might, must, ought to, shall, should, will, and would. Modal verbs are a category of auxiliary verbs and are often known as modal auxiliary verbs. These verbs are used to indicate modality. They can express possibility, probability, ability, permission, obligation, etc. He can sing beautifully. It might rain tomorrow. They might not attend the meeting. Marlene ought to buy a new phone. I will complete this tomorrow. Would you like to have a cup of coffee? Modal verbs are never used with other auxiliary verbs such as do, be, and have. The negative is formed by simply adding not after the modal verb, and the interrogative is formed by the inversion of the subject and the verb. Unlike auxiliary verbs, modal verbs never change form. They cannot be inflected. Just to recap what we have discussed, definition. Modal verbs are auxiliary verbs that express modality. Auxiliary verbs are verbs that help the main verb to express tense, grammatical aspect, modality, voice, etc. Function. Modal verbs indicate the possibility, probability, ability, permission, obligation, necessity, etc. Auxiliary verbs indicate the tense, mood, grammatical aspect, etc. of the main verb. Inflection. Modal verbs are not subject to inflections. Auxiliary verbs are subject to inflections. Verbs. Modal verbs in English include can, could, may, might, must, ought to, shall, should, will, and would. Auxiliary verbs in English include be, do, and have. Are you ready for a challenge? I am going to give you a sentence and I want you to fill in the blank with the correct modal verb. Ready? I think I have failed the test, but I'm not sure. The modal verb we are looking for here is might. I think I might have failed the test, but I'm not sure. We have to rush. We missed the last bus home. The correct modal verb here is mustn't. We have to rush. We mustn't miss the last bus home. If you had let me know earlier, I have been able to come. The modal verb we're looking for here is would. If you had let me know earlier, I would have been able to come. Anybody attend the lecture, or is it just for registered students? The correct modal verb here is can. Can anybody attend the lecture, or is it just for registered students? You have bothered coming. I've done it already. The modal verb we're looking for here is needn't. You needn't have bothered coming. I've done it already. If there is an age restriction, then you go in as you are too young. The correct modal verb here is shouldn't. If there is an age restriction, then you shouldn't go in as you are too young. The government vote on the issue tomorrow. It's scheduled for 10 a.m. The modal verb we're looking for here is will. The government will vote on the issue tomorrow. It's scheduled for 10 a.m. We leave now, or do you want to wait? The correct modal verb here is shall. Shall we leave now, or do you want to wait? You have worked so hard last week. You look so tired now. The modal verb we're looking for is ought not to. You ought not to have worked so hard last week. You look so tired now. Great job today, Abba Mama. This is really great practice. Keep practicing as you speak using auxiliary and modal verbs. The more you practice, the better you'll be.